write the governor, tell him about his Georgia state. Well, I'ma write the governor, tell him about his Georgia state. Well, I'ma tell him to do something just before it is too late. When I was down in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese. Well, when I was in the Pacific.
In 1993, I stood at Malecon, the beautiful beach walk of Havana. In the vast horizon I saw no ships. It was totally empty, no tankers, nothing. Because the government of the USA had forbidden ships that anchored at Cuba to continue to the USA. The most effective war of commerce. In my luggage was a heavy brick. No brick. A big heavy atlas, the most modern handbook of heart medicine, which I delivered to the hospital of Salvatore D'Allenda in Havana. No chance that the hospital could have had it in any other way by a personal courier. This was during the special period. Soviet Union had just collapsed, no oil, no petrol to Cuba. But even when there was a lack of food, people could hardly afford to eat. In the hospital I saw the special department for children from Chernobyl that were affected by cancer from the nuclear disaster in 1986. They had been invited to Cuba to get medical treatment and sun. This is the biggest export of that little country, Cuba, so utterly harmed by the politics of the big neighbor, the USA. The doctors educated for free in Cuba, who today are working in so many countries in Latin America. 20,000 Cuban doctors in the most remote and poorest districts of Latin America. Let's go back. Since 1902, the USA has dominated Cuba and its economy. In the sugar plantations owned by Americans to 60%, the illiterate sugarcane workers were slaving 11 hours a day for a wage in which they could hardly live. Just like in the Cuban refineries, the mines and factories owned by Americans. With all its weaknesses, the Cuban Revolution lit an enormous hope in all Latin America. It became a living example, an example of the possibility of getting rid of the economic exploitation of the USA. The USA, which in most of the post-war period has supported each oligarchy, each military dictatorship in Latin America, which has oppressed its citizens to exploit the natural resources and the cheap manpower of the whole continent. So many priests, so many teachers, so many poor farmers, so many students who fought for social justice and have been murdered by the US-supported fascist governments. It seems as if the American politicians at last understood that they had to ease the sanctions against Cuba. In January 1999, the US President Bill Clinton eased travel restrictions and allowed an exchange of baseball sport. Barack Obama was the first American president who visited Cuba in 2016. He was easing the restrictions against Cuba in a more material way. But with the election of Donald Trump and the US president, the state of relations between the United States and Cuba quickly deteriorated. In 2019, the Trump administration announced new restrictions on American travel to Cuba. The administration's policy aimed to impose restrictions with regard to travel and funding. Why should we believe that Trump will be any milder in the new period of his presidency? Why should we believe that he will make things better? We strongly oppose the discriminating and criminal methods against Cuba to strangle the society of the island in the Caribbean Sea. For a new and better policy for this resilient little country, Cuba, and its right to live in its own way. May Cuba prosper. Lift the blockade.
I had to go back down in Georgia and bow down on my knees. I got people down in Georgia that I'm afraid to go and see. I got people down in Georgia that I'm afraid to go and see. Well, I'm afraid that gang down there, they might lynch for me. Taking out 2 men and also their wives. Well, they're taking out 2 men and also their wives. Well, they're taking them out.